This video is brought to you by Zarrakan Productions, an umbrella group composed of over 10 YouTube shows, an archive of over 4,000 videos covering a wide variety of topics and businesses both inside and outside of Second Life. Please go to zarrakan.com for a complete listing of media links. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for our activity feed. Subscribe to us on YouTube for future updates, and please support us on Patreon. Thank you for your time, and may I present another Zarrakan production. Welcome to Wandering with Zarrakan. I am your camera cat showing you some of the amazing places I have been on Second Life. This is a video I made about Telephone Museum by Denzel at the Simdent. Visit the Telephone Museum and learn the historical evolution of the telephone from its birth up to present day. Come and see the first ever phone that was created by Alexander Graham Bell, and 50 more telephone models of the past century. Play the memory and trivia phone games, and try your luck with the gacha machine. Please join me as I explore Telephone Museum.
Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell.
To this day, many authors continue to argue that it was the American engineer Elisha Gray the true inventor of the telephone and not Alexander Bell. Being as one of the co-founders of the Western Electric Company, began to experimenting with electrical devices and acoustic telegraphs. On February 14, 1876, Elisha Gray applied for caveat on a telephone prototype, exactly the same date as Bell. In the history of inventing science, timing is everything, and the big conflict with his main antagonist, Alexander Bell, had just begun. Possibly it was Gray who first developed the method of transmitting the sound of a human voice on a wire, using a liquid transmitter. But it was the legal claims of Bell that prevailed, and Bell was awarded the patent. In 1880, Gray became professor of dynamic electricity in Ohio. After the loss of the telephone patent, he continued his research until the end of the 20th century was granted more than 70 invention patents, including the musical telegraph, a method of transmitting musical tones on a telegraph wire, an early form of the modern synthesizer. "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you," told Alexander Graham Bell his assistant Thomas Watson, and the history of telephone has begun. Born in 1847 in Edinburgh, the son of Alexander Bell and Eliza Simmons, showed from early stages of his youth his talent about sciences. His father, who played a big role in his inventing genius, had a worldwide reputation as a teacher and author of textbooks on correct speech. After studying at the University of London and following briefly the career of a full-time teacher, he moved with his family to Canada and later to Boston. Eventually, with strong financial support and with the remarkable aid of his assistant Thomas Watson, Bell developed an early acoustic telegraph and drew up a patent application for a telephone design in 1876, exactly the same day with his main rival, the American Elisha Gray. It's unclear who filed the caveat first, but Bell's model was chosen because of his better, and more specific method of transmitting. As today, Alexander Graham Bell is considered the father of telephone, and the one who credited with patenting the first practical telephone. Although his invention faced more than 500 court challenges against his patent, Bell's success continued establishing the Bell Telephone Company, which has been transformed to one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the world in our days, the well-known giant AT&T. Attributing the true inventor to a specific invention can be a confusing business. Often credit goes to the inventor of the most practical or best working invention rather than to the original inventor. Likewise, there was a lot of controversy and intrigue regarding the invention of the telephone, as today, Alexander Bell is credited as the father of the telephone, but Antonio Meucci, an Italian engineer who left his studies in Florence, and emigrated with his wife in the United States, grasped the idea of telephony and began developing the design of a telephone device, even earlier than Bell in 1849. Working day and night under difficult conditions, Antonio Meucci managed to master the principles of electromagnetic voice transmission, and in 1856 he devised an electromagnetic machine as a way of connecting his bedroom to his laboratory, to communicate with his wife. He filed a caveat in 1871 for his design of his invention, but due to the fact that he did not provide enough technical specifications, Antonio Meucci could not renew his caveat, and until the last decade his role in the invention of the telephone was forgotten. In 2002, the United States House of Representatives passed a resolution honoring finally Meucci's contributions and work. After the establishment of the telephone invention, big telephone companies like Alicia's Gray Western Electric, or Bell's Telephone Company, begun to offer the magneto service. Magneto is an electrical device that generates electric current by moving a coil past a magnet. You've probably seen many times magneto phones in old movies. These phones, despite their quite large size compared to modern telephones, had in addition a hand-cranked generator on the right side of the phones, which was used to generate the ring by causing an electric current of low voltage, so they could call the switchboard operator, or others, telephone users. There were also two large dry cell batteries inside the telephone. Batteries were required because, unlike offices in large cities, small offices in remote areas did not supply power to operate the telephones. In the dawn of 21st century, the candlestick telephone became extremely popular from the late 1890s to the 1940s. This style of phone was separated into two pieces, a mouthpiece that stood upright and a receiver which was placed in your ear when you were placing a call. Candlestick telephones became an important piece of technology for businesses. The earliest candlesticks had wooden receivers and bases. Eventually, the candlestick telephones evolved and were made primarily from brass and bakelite or hard rubber parts. The French company Grammont also produced a French version of the candlestick telephones which had plastic receivers similar to the two models below. "My word, it talks," exclaimed Emperor Dom Pedro of Brazil when he tried this early phone at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. Although this Bell's model was not the very first phone with which Bell earned his patent, it is the very first phone which used electromagnetic transmission. This very early phone model consists of a mouthpiece with a diaphragm stretched over the end, and in the center is located a piece of sheet iron. On the backside there is an electromagnet attached to some binding posts. When the device was wired in a circuit with the receiver and a battery, the current from the battery went through the electromagnet, creating a pure magnetic field. When someone spoke into the mouthpiece, The sound waves vibrated the diaphragm, making the iron piece to move back and forth, forcing this field to create an electric current in the wire. When the current passed through the receiver, the diaphragm of a similar device in another room vibrated, reproducing the original sound waves. It was not until the beginning of the new century that magneto-wall phones and candlestick phones began to add the rotary dial. The American school teacher, Alman Brown Strauger, was the inventor who grasped and developed the idea of the rotary dial on a telephone. In 1891 he applied for a patent for his invention, but the rotary dial did not become common until the early 1920s. On the rotary dial, the rotation of a finger wheel is implemented by a mechanical barrier to prevent further rotation. Due to this back-and-forth rotation, the dial interrupts the electrical current of the telephone line a specific number of times for each digit. And thereby this dial and release action generates electrical pulses, which the telephone exchange decodes into each dialed digit. The use of letters on the rotary dials was selected as a mnemonic system in order to help customers remember the exchange names and home numbers. As it is noticeable the letters Q and Z were missing from the rotary dials, it is because at that time the exchanges that were using those letters were so few that it wasn't worth featuring them as redundant letters in the dial. During the 1940s and into the 1950s, having a telephone in the house was regarded as a luxury by ordinary families. But after World War II, home phones became standard, and some years later had a much neater plastic-covered cable which extended when stretched. Practical kitchen phones were created, and the design became farther more elegant, and a variety of many colors was finally an option. In 1955, Bell introduced the Princess Telephone, a compact phone designed for convenient use in the bedroom, including a light-up dial. The model was available in a broad range of colors, including pink, yellow, and white. Some models of the Princess Telephone can be seen below. A field phone was a type of communication device, which was mainly used for military operations during battle conditions on the field. Field phones appeared as early as 1889. The first purposely designed field telephones were used by the British in the Second Boer War. Most of the times field phones were using wires up to 8 kilometers long, other times Army was using civilian circuits when available. Radio communication was available too for the field phones, but it was not often preferred due to the limited range and unsecure transmission. Local batteries were used, in addition of a hand generator on the side of the phone to power the telephone's ringer and batteries and to send the call. In the 70s, field phones were replaced by radio telephones and modern combat net radio transceivers. The 1977 breakup of AT&T revolutionized phone design, as the phone was no longer a standardized leased portal into the network, but it became an object unto itself, resulting in shapes from a hamburger telephone to this famous all-time iconic Hot Lips phone. Eventually the Hot Lips phone became one of the biggest commercial success in the 1980s. Remakes of the Hot Lips phone are still sold even today. It was in 1941 when Western Electric first experimented with the touch-tone technology, but only after years of testing. In 1963, the dual-tone multi-frequency method was introduced by the Bell Systems, because this new technology proved effective in speed and in cost. Over the next decades, the touch-tone service replaced the traditional pulse dialing and eventually became a global standard for the telecommunications. The additional keys * in hash buttons started to appear on the new telephones at the same time as telephones started to get buttons. When Bell Labs designed the push-button phones, they added those keys to allow access for telephone-based computers, exactly how they're used today. Though push-button telephones were introduced in 1963, the rotary dial telephones were still widely in use for many years. In the 70s, the majority still had rotary phones, and it wasn't until the 80s that most of the subscribers owned push-button telephones. Unlike common belief, the history of the mobile phone began much earlier than most of us think. In World War II, field phones and wireless communications were regularly used for the first time to coordinate military movements and various army operations. Later in the 40s, mobile equipment in the cars were transmitting voice signals. Mobile services began to appear in Sweden and Russia as well. Although those devices used a wireless transmission, they were still based on radio transmitters with a limited range and limited number of frequencies. It was in 1947 when Bell Labs proposed the idea of a cellular network. The cellular technology solved a lot of problems. By dividing up land into hexagon cells, each land base station transmits the signals from each phone and pass it onwards to another phone. A denser network of cells ensures that there are enough frequencies for everyone. It took 25 years more for the cellular technology to evolve, and in 1973 Dr. Cooper invented the first portable handheld phone. He was the first person to make a mobile phone call. 10 years later, in 1983, the first commercial cellular phone became a reality. It was a Motorola model which needed 10 hours for a full charge, offering only 30 minutes of talk time in the price of $4,000.